Welcome to the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast, your guide to understanding how to get out of the Wall Street rat race and start your own mailbox money lifestyle. Now, don't let these handsome Southern draws fool you. These financial minds are teaching our country to enhance savings, increase cash flow, and create passive income, all without the help of Wall Street. Are you ready to break through? Now here are your hosts, Russ Morgan and Joey Murray.
Welcome. This is the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast. Your host, Joey, the Italian Stallion Murray, joined as always by Russ, the Idea Guy Morgan.
Joey,
yes.
How much time do you spend in your day looking at your phone?
Ooh, I don't even want to look at my screen time report. I haven't even looked at it, to be honest with you.
How many times do we find seconds in our day, hours in our week, when we're not doing something and the first thing we do is look down at our phones?
Oh, it's so easy to do. It's just a filler. It's just like almost like a drug.
You said filler. I think that's a really interesting point there. What are we filling our days and weeks with?
A lot of times it's just mindless things whenever we're not working.
It is. And I just think about, Joey, our kids growing up before our very eyes and the number of weeks we have left before they leave the house. And if we take all of those seconds, minutes, hours that we spend when we have a little bit of downtime, what are we going to use those for? Are we going to use those to find ways to have more time, more experience, more moments with our families? Or are we going to allow it to go in mind-numbing, useless information that comes off a little black thing in your hand?
No doubt, man. I think that is such a great thing, a reminder that regret is probably one of the biggest things that we don't. It's called regret because it's looking back and it's not current time, right? But you mentioned our life in weeks, right? Your weeks being passing. It's so much easier for me to look back over the last week. Maybe I'm just looking at my business and saying, okay, what did I spend my time on? But to think about time with our families in light of that, man, I mean, my daughter just got a week taller, right? I'll share this with you. A couple weeks ago, we actually went on an experience that was driven just by the same idea. It's like, wait a minute, I get a free weekend. My wife needed to do some planning at the house. And I said, I'm going to go do an experience with the girls. Like I could have stayed in a hotel somewhere just to get out of her hair so she could have some more time. But I said, man, when is the only time that I would be able to take my daughters to stay in an Airstream, right? My wife would never join me on that trip because she's just not a happy glamper. She would always want to stay in like a cabin or something like that. So I found this camper that was at this park up in North Alabama on this beautiful lookout mountain over like Chattanooga and that area. And I took 5 little girls to stay in a camper for 3 nights. And you would have thought that they were going to Disney World. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're talking about 4 bunks on one side and 1 bed on the other side. And I've got my baby in a playpen at the foot of the bed, just trying to get her to get to sleep. It was an amazing experience. But just in light of what you just mentioned, that was a week that I could check the box that I feel like we used it well, that my daughters got an opportunity to experience something with their dad that will live with them forever. And I think that is something as parents, as dads, it's so much harder to keep track of that. But man, if we can just think of our lives and think of the impact we have with our kids in weeks, how much more will we make the most of it?
Well, I say those things, and man, what a wonderful experience. What are you doing with your time, right? Is the time like this time learning and how you're growing so that way you can get closer to having more time with your family? And I'm just going to challenge you throughout this week that when you have spare moments, how are you going to choose to use it? Are you going to choose to use it to educate yourself, which will help excel and expedite and accelerate your pace at which you're going to become financially free? Or are you going to look at one more Facebook ad? Are you going to get one more YouTube video? These are the things in our life where time will go by and we will never wish we would have gotten to watch one more video online. It'll be, I wish I would have had one more moment like Joey just experienced. And our guest today has some amazing experiences that he had in his life that changed the way that he looked at what he wanted to do and how he said, I cannot live in this cubicle anymore. I want to start experiencing it. And his real estate journey is one that we would all love to read about, in which you can. They actually wrote books on this. And I think you're going to really enjoy our interview today with Reed Goossens. Let's listen in. Okay, I've listened to at least 5 podcasts. I'm now an expert in the infinite banking process. Maybe not, but yet I would love to talk to somebody about it. How can they do it, Joey?
It's as simple as going to freecall.wealthwithoutwallstreet.com. You can sign up for a short 15-minute call to see if this is a fit for you, and you can work with one of our coaches to financial freedom. Welcome into the show. We have Reed Goossens as our guest. Reed, thanks for being here, brother.
Hey, lads. Thank you for having me on the show. I've been looking forward to coming on here for some time.
Yeah, Reed, so you have a really interesting story. I want to hear about it. You came all the way from Australia to chase a girl and chase real estate and many other things. I don't know where in that line you want to start, but you were telling me something about, helping Russian billionaires on a yacht. So I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, okay, we'll start right at the beginning. So I graduated in 2007, structural engineering. That's my background. That's what I got a degree in. 2008, moved straight to London just because I wanted to live abroad. And at that time, obviously 2008 hit, but I was fortunate enough to have an engineering job working on the 2012 Olympic Games, the building of the infrastructure in 2008. Was there for about a year until my visa ran out. And then I moved to the south of France where a buddy of mine was just like, hey man, the world's crumbling. No one's hiring. You should come and try and get a job working on as a deckhand. If you ever seen the show Below Deck on Bravo, it's exactly the same thing where you're a crew for very, very wealthy individuals. And I did that for about a year. And that's when during that time and living in the south of France, gallivanting around, I actually bumped into and met my then girlfriend, now wife, Erica, who's American, on the beaches of Spain after running of the Bulls. Fast forward, cruised across the Atlantic Ocean with this yacht, came to the Caribbean, and then realized that, hey, this is an incredible life, but I want to go back and start using my engineering degree. And that's when I ended up moving back to Australia in early 2010. And at that point, it was a really sort of smack in the face of, okay, you're in a cubicle again. You just had these incredible 2 years going around the world. How do you get someone to pay you to continue to do that, right? And for me at the time, I had no idea what entrepreneurship was or even meant. But I was intrigued by somehow someone paying me to live my life and not having to exchange time for money. And I didn't know that word, exchanging time for money. I just was like, I don't want to be in a cubicle for the next 40 years of my life. And I felt like a star athlete sitting on the bench, watching my life, just the game going on in front of me and me not actually partaking in it. And so through that sort of pain came the stumbling across the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And that's really when the aha moment hit for me. And it's like, this is exactly what I need to be doing, creating income from passive investments. And so I determined, well, what do I need to get involved in? And for me, being a structural engineer, then the blinkers came off and was like, hang on, you already work as a day job in and around building infrastructure, retail, multifamily. And I was like, maybe you just need to start paying more attention at work and start rubbing shoulders with the people who own these development deals. And that's what I did. And so I started then changing my tune about it, but I also went out and started educating myself on just getting my own money working for me. And that's where I started attending some real estate events in Australia. Come to the end of 2011, Erica, who had met many years prior in Spain, had moved to Australia to do a master's degree, and she'd finished that. And I just said, look, I really want to live in New York City. I'm going to quit my well-paying engineering job. You'll finish your degree. You're going to move back to the States anyway. I want to move back with you. I think you're an awesome girl. And we moved to New York City together. And through that, I quickly discovered the incredible wealth of knowledge and infrastructure that here in the United States, you guys have readily at your fingertips. And being in the Big Apple, it was like taking information from a fire hose. And but at that time, I'd been sort of self-educating for about 2 years. And when I moved to the United States in early 2012, I had to get a job. I had to figure out credit scores. I had to figure out all the stuff. But at the same time, I realized, oh my gosh, there's an incredible low barrier to entry in secondary and tertiary markets for real estate compared to where I'm from in Australia. And so I bought my first property for $38,000 in upstate New York because I could get there on a Greyhound bus on a Saturday. And that's really the coming to America story. So I sort of hopefully didn't go on too long, but that was really it. And the rest is kind of history, as they say.
Well, it's so funny you mentioned running with the Bulls. Russ was just running with the Bulls just the other day.
I was?
I'm just kidding. No, we do not run with Bulls. That was one thing that you quickly said and then moved on. I'm like, that's pretty amazing.
Well, he did say something that really, the first thing I wrote down on my pad here was south of France, because that by far is my favorite place in the world. And I've been there once for maybe 10 days. So it's not like I got to spend a whole lot of time below deck or anything. I definitely was not running with any Bulls. But tell me about that network, because I think there's lots of things we can unpack from that. But I want to first start with the network, because do you believe it was the people that you were around that opened your eyes, that helped kind of shine light to the situation? Or if not, what was it?
Are you talking specifically about working on the super yachts?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It was really just a conversation with a friend of mine in London, and I just wasn't ready to move home yet after being a year in London, living abroad and just having that itch, being an early 20s type of guy. And he's like, man, I'm down in the south of France. We actually studied engineering together. And he's like, just come down and see if you can get a job. And you got to do this sort of, 1 7-day course, safety at sea type of thing. And really then just come down and start walking the docks and really door knocking on the back of boats and seeing what jobs you can pick up, day working. And I think I rocked up in the south of France with my big backpack and 800 euros. It wasn't a lot. Staying in hostels and just, going out every night, trying to network with people, having good rosé, and getting up the next morning at 5 a.m., walking the docks, and hey, you got day work, No. And then someone says, yes, it's 100 euros. That buys you another sort of week of rent. And you just sort of keep doing it until you eventually get a job. And I got a job on actually my buddy's yacht. And, but I did realize really quickly that I was a laborer, right? I was just the hired help for these very wealthy people. I was exposed to some incredible wealth that it didn't change my mind around wealth. It was just like this. It was stupid wealth. It's so much money to own these yachts and to be in the south of France. And it was like, I never aspired to have a yacht, but I aspired to live my life on my own terms, which essentially was what I was doing at the time, but I was still exchanging money for time. But it was more of the experience, and the experience really, like, I look back at that time and I'm like, that was the most incredible time of my entire life. Like traveling across the Atlantic Ocean, 14 days at sea, like who's, throwing up over the side. Like it was.
That sounds exciting. Do you think it was more so that being exposed to that wealth, or was it being exposed to having to go back and sit in the cubicle that was ultimately the kick in the pants that made you move? Oh,
I think so the challenge, and I've now realized this, and looking back, hindsight's 2020, I like uncertainty, and moving to the south of France, just be like, I'm just going to give this a go. And the worst case scenario is I get on a plane and I move back to Australia. And all of a sudden these doors open and this incredible experience happens. And that's how you should live life, right? And that's, for me, I had no expectations of what would happen going to the south of France. Some could say being exposed to that lifestyle subconsciously helped, but we were also, the hired help. So I had other Aussies and other mates who just would go out and, drink cheap beer because we didn't earn a lot of money, and so you become frugal with money. You know how to stretch a dollar when you're backpacking, I'd tell you that. And so when I moved back to Australia, all those experiences kind of came to a grinding halt because I was now just, oh, hey, how's everyone going? You know, all my mates back in Australia, I've just spent 2 years abroad and nothing had changed, right? And everyone just had day jobs and, okay, I'm like, wow, I had this incredible experience. I was very fortunate to be exposed to it, but it was also a decision that I made, right? With limited funds and not knowing what the hell I was doing. But I still did it, you know, knowing that I would come out okay on the other end. And I guess a lot of people would look at that and think, I would never have the guts to go do that. Well, it's about building those guts to go and do it and change your life, because you change your story, you're going to change your life and you're going to have incredible memories that will last you forever.
Stallion, I love it when we get to hear what people would be doing if they got to financial freedom. The last one that I got to read, somebody said, I would be driving and picking up my kid every day from school. That motivates me.
That is why you need to be a part of the community that is seeking financial freedom. Go to community.wealthwithoutwallstreet.com. You can join for free today.
Joey, what I've heard is that they build engineers a lot differently in Australia.
How so?
Well, I mean, in America, an engineer, like the idea of change is maybe they add like a straw to their water.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, change is like typically for most engineers is not really high on their priority list. So Reed is loving change.
Yeah. Well, what I hear is something that we've really been talking a lot about lately, Russ, is that what is the Wealth Without Wall Street process, and what's our view is that people are in the dark, right? They're in a tunnel and they have limitations because of that tunnel. They can't even see the light. They don't even know they're in a tunnel until they see the light. And then they realize, wait a minute, I've got limiting beliefs. And I hear you talk about, man, I just got, maybe it was kind of below the surface, but you were around obscene wealth. At some point, your lid had to be raised a little bit there, at least a little bit. Even if you knew you weren't necessarily today, you're over there drinking the cheap beer and everything else. But then you go home and you realize, man, my network is limiting. They're standing still. I've been living life and I come back and they're standing still. So those limitations were kind of in your, at least at that point, you were coming face to face with that. And then you mentioned the Robert Kiyosaki book, which, by the way, if we could charge everybody for saying Rich Dad Poor Dad on the show, we would be done. Like that's passive income right there. But because that was also a limiting knowledge, that now you had a limit to your knowledge. Now you get this book and it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Wealth is not some big pile of cash somewhere. It's an ongoing cash flow that is streaming towards me every month that gives me the freedom to do what I want to do. So I see him on this journey and all those things are kind of falling away. And now you're walking towards this light.
And so now you get to New York, you buy your first property for $38,000 and it starts giving you money monthly, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. At least on paper it did.
Tell us what happened next.
So great learning curve. Like in the whole thing about when I did eventually get to the point of taking that plunge, again, you know, we fast forward a couple of years. I was middle of 2012. I'd picked up the book Rich Dad Poor Dad in the beginning of 2010. So it was a couple of years of self-education in Australia and in New York. And I got to the point that I had an analysis paralysis, and I figured out, and I realized that I'm never going to get to deal number 10 without doing deal number 1, right? And it was my money that I'd saved from working in the corporate world. And I was willing to risk it. And I was willing to take a bet on myself. And that's, I guess, the biggest thing that we can talk about through all my experiences is that I'm willing to take a bet on myself. And we've got to learn as human beings to take a bet, because if you can't bet on yourself, who the hell are you going to bet on? And so that is the most important thing I want to bestow upon people. And so when I went out and said, okay, I could pay $30,000 to a Robert Kiyosaki boot camp, or I could go spend it on an actual deal and learn the process rather than reading a book about it, then that was what I wanted to do. And I was willing to take whatever consequences were going to come from that. If I lost it, it's my money. It was my money to lose. It wasn't anyone else's. I subsequently didn't lose any money. I actually made a bunch of money. There was a drive-by shooting at the property, but I learned pretty quickly what Section 8 housing was. And as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed Australian, realizing what, Class D housing is. And so, again, not coming from that a little bit of, dumb Aussie to understanding why you can make money in those types of investments. But when you have that bad apple, or you potentially could have that bad apple because you're investing in low economic areas, you need to diversify over 4 or 5 deals, right? They're very cheap. They're very cheap for a reason. And that's what I didn't realize in the beginning. I thought, this is $38,000. This is exactly, why isn't my property manager calling me back? It was because I was one property out of probably 500 that he or she managed.
But do you admit like everything? Because that was all your money, right?
Right. And I came out of that fine. I made my money back. I made a little bit more and I sold it like a year later. It actually got me into deal number 2. And that deal number 2 got me into deal number 3. And it's not about the amount of money you make on your first deal. You always, in an ideal world, you love to crack it out of the park. It's about getting your foot in the door. It's about getting off home base and to that first base, using a baseball analogy for
Reed, you just said something that just triggered something in my mind. I was just talking with one of our clients last week, and we were talking about the CARES Act and how, he had significant amount of money in his 401k, and he's actively investing in real estate, making very good returns consistently. Okay. He's not like a brand new investor. He's been doing this for years, and he had some trepidation to the idea of taking money out of this known thing of this 401k he's been putting in for years and years. And the conversation led to exactly what you just said. It was, who are you betting on, right? Are you betting on yourself or on someone else that is this money babysitter that you can't control and is falling asleep on the couch while your kids are running around? Like, this is what we talk about on the show, is investing in ourselves. What can you add to that conversation for someone listening saying, okay, I hear what you're saying. What steps should I be taking to invest in myself? How do I get that confidence level to step out and to say, I need to take a bet on myself?
I think without getting too deep and woo-woo here, I think you need to first start to give yourself permission to do that, to allow yourself to do that. I meet so many people who want to get involved in real estate and have this hang up of like, well, I wish I did it 20 years ago. It's like, dude, stop having those internal conversations with yourself. You're here right now. It's your journey. Own it and give yourself permission that you're here. You're here right now. Let's make the most of it, right? The Chinese proverb of, you planted a tree 20 years ago, the next best time is right now. The same applies to real estate or investing in yourself, or using different vehicles to create wealth. It just means you have to get started in taking action. And then the little action you can take is by simply going to a local real estate investment association event. And that's what I did when I first moved to the United States. And I challenge people listening to this show, once we get out of COVID, go to 3 meetup events related to what you want to do. And obviously, if it's related to real estate, go to 3 real estate events and go consistently to those events over a period of 6 months. And I bet you will have started to surround yourself and change your mindset about how you take control of your investment future by just attending those events. And through that, that will be the start of the snowball. It will take time. It doesn't happen overnight. But just by putting yourself in a vulnerable situation, by going to an event, shaking hands or elbow bumping, whatever the hell we're going to be doing in the future, it's about putting yourself out there and taking that first practical step. And that's an easy step to take. And if you're an introvert, well, I'm sorry, you're going to have to get over that. And you have to put yourself out there, because that's what it takes. It takes putting yourself out there to get uncomfortable or in an uncomfortable situation in order to keep pushing your boundaries. And you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable all the time in order to help you progress forward in life. So
well, it's one of those things that you better do it, right? Reed, the other day I did a video and I took a typical financial situation and I just said, somebody making 100,000 saving 10%. How long would it take them to replace their 100,000? And there's a couple different rules of thumb out there. And one is just a really simple 25 times how much money you make. Mm-hmm. So for the average person, saving 10% of their money, earning 11%, and this is in the fake mutual fund world, right? It would take 31 years before they got $2.5 million. Now, we all know when they got 31 years down the road, that $2.5 million is worth a fraction of what it is today. So really, they're going to have to keep working in the future. as opposed to I took the same $10,000 and just bought a rental property that kicked off $300 a month. It took 9 years to get to that same point. Well, you obviously started to figure out some sort of velocity to your approach, right? You've become very successful. Talk about the accelerators, the things that made you go from 1 deal, 2 deals, 3 deals to ultimately where you're buying multifamily properties and doing it at such a large scale.
Yeah, so it came through a very another aha moment in my life, a conversation with a very good friend of mine, a Canadian guy who came down to New York City at the end of 2013, and I was boasting to him like, "Hey man, I've got a couple of these deals in upstate New York, crushing it. You know, maybe making $800 a month, clear cash flow, but still working full time." And he said, "You know, well done, good on you." And he told me, he's like, "I just bought a 70-unit deal." I said, 70? And he said, "Yeah, 70. I said, "How the hell did you do that?" And he told me about how he got a mentor, about how he did Seller Carback Finance, about how he raised a couple of $100,000 from his friends and family in order to other people's money to use it to buy this deal that he was implying the exact same philosophy from a business plan point of view, like going in, renovating the units and increasing the rent. Like that's exactly the same thing, but he was doing it over 70 units. And that to me was like, well, if I moved halfway across the world, if I bought some stuff in upstate New York, like that's the hard stuff over. Like let's take this to the next level. And I had known at that point, back to my sort of investing in myself and not going down the $30,000 mentorship route and just going and buying a deal, I'd know that I was coming to the end of my tether in terms of I had a couple of deals, but I just needed that mentor to help me push me to the next level. And that's where I went and got a mentor, and a mentor that I was very frugal with. I knew that I didn't want to spend a lot of money, but I needed to be surrounded with people who are actually doing what I wanted to do, which was large scale multifamily. And through that, I was able to get started, start building my podcast, start building my following, start building the investor database to use those investors to buy into deals, and eventually knowing that I was always going to be my own operator and breaking out from my mentor and then going out and starting my own company. And to date, we have $250 million assets under management. It's not to boast, but it's just to show how in 8 years I've come from literally no real estate investing experience whatsoever to financial freedom, running my own company, and $250 million under management and growing. And the whole thing is, if I can do it moving halfway across the world, then so can the average American. It's just about the type of mindset you need and the fact that you're willing to bet on yourself. So, yeah.
To talk a little bit, you mentioned mentor was that accelerator for you. For those who have never sought out what a mentor in, for instance, the real estate space or any business space or wherever they are, and they feel like their passions and are led based upon their skill sets. What was that best advice the mentor gave you that they should, or how did you pick out the mentor, and then what was some of the best advice they gave you?
Yeah. So how I picked out the mentor. So I talked about being frugal. I didn't want to go spend $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 on a mentor. I wanted to spend it on someone who I resonated with first and foremost, and who was relatively cheap and was doing something, right? Was actually doing. I'd been spending a lot of time. I think you guys were just on my show talking about people on stage and educating, but they've never actually done anything. All these old stories of back in early 2000s, I was doing this. And you're just like, well, what are you doing today? It's 2013. Like that was what I resonated with. So someone who was actively doing it was within my budget. But what the big thing was, Russ, was the fact that I wrote a check and I, again, gave myself permission. I handed over that check. It was about $2.5, $3 grand. I can't remember what it was. It was a pretty small sum when you think about what mentors cost. But I was, again, giving myself permission to invest in myself. And that was probably the most important part, because I knew I had it in me, but I just needed that kick to say, okay, well, here's $2,000, here's $2.5 grand. You've just bought it, right? Now you own it. You don't break it. Yeah. And you then, like, it allowed me to take myself more seriously. I think it was, my mentor was definitely had some good guiding rails and guiding posts, but it really made me solidify that I was worth taking my business to the next level, and I was worth going out and doing what I aspired to do, which was be my own boss and take that, I was cruising at a certain altitude, take that altitude to the next level.
Well, hobbyists play golf by themselves. Professional golfers hire coaches.
Correct.
Or whatever it is, right? People who are aspiring to be professional and to reach certain levels, they hire, why do you think Joey came to work with me?
Self-guiding divine light, right? We say.
No comment.
By the way, I'm still waiting on that $2,500 check.
So Reed, this has been really eye-opening, because what you've done is you've really shown people the hurdles that they may believe are in the way. You've just dashed all those. I mean, to come across the world. Now, granted, you didn't have to learn a new language or anything like that.
Right.
I mean, let's at least, hold on to that. You actually sound.
If you would have came down to the South, you really would have had to learn a new language. But I digress.
I mean, you actually sound cooler in America being from Australia. That gives you a benefit. But you've really taken all the work out of it and said, anybody can do this. Is there anything else from an advice standpoint that you would pass on to somebody who is, again, they're at that point, they've been listening to the show and they say, okay, I hear these things, I want to take action. What would be one more practical thing you would advise that person to do?
Well, two things on, just to wrap up the mentor thing, is the other thing is mentors change over years. And I've got a different mentor today than what I had when I first started. And I'll have a different mentor in 10 years' time, right? So that is very important to note. The second thing is, it's a piece of advice my dad gave me, when I was very young. And the advice is, a fool and their money are easily parted. Do not be a fool. And what I mean by that is, start with education. You guys obviously do it to the nth degree, and that's what your whole platform is built on. So taking that education and doing it daily, so it becomes part of your DNA. Like, it's not a hobby. Creating financial freedom will need to be nearly like a second-time job. And it feels like that, and feels like with all the education you got to do. But when you love it and you know what you're trying to move away from, your pain point, which might be your job or your financial situation, and knowing that that's driving you to get to the next point in your life, that education and that self-education and that self-propelling motion will come very naturally. So again, don't be a fool with your money and start educating yourself first and foremost. But then there'll get a point where you need to take action, and you need to be surrounded by people who are taking action, so you can be the average of those 5 people and you don't feel left behind.
All right. So really quickly, Reed, share with us, what are you doing now, right? Years ago, you were invested in Section 8 housing in upstate New York. Obviously, you've transitioned a lot since then. What are some of the most recent deals that you've been doing?
Yeah, we just closed on a 284 unit deal in Austin, Texas. I don't want to give away the price, but it was over 40 mil. And so we're raising a bunch of money. That was just before COVID hit. We've just got another deal under contract, a brand new construction deal in an opportunity zone that we're buying pre-TCO, which means a temporary certificate of occupancy. And really now looking to build out our management team, in terms of, it's just me and my business partner and executive assistant. We've got a couple of analysts, starting to build out asset management, starting to build out property management, starting to build out construction management, and really start creating an ecosystem of businesses that can feed from one to another as we buy more and more deals. And try and systemize it more, because up until this point, it's been me and my business partner rolling up the sleeve and doing every part of the business that we can. And now putting on our big boy pants and starting to hire people, creating standard operating procedures, and really creating a company that will be around for the next 20 to 30 years. So yeah.
What was your motivation to build out all those different various facets of the business? Like, what is on the other side of that for you?
One is control, but two is also knowing the engineer brain within me that I've always, since a little kid, I like to take things apart and put them back together again. And I've been very good at observing other businesses and how they've grown. And don't get me wrong, real estate is a vehicle for wealth. But my belief as I've grown is that when you have other businesses that can provide an ecosystem and they can feed from one to another, it means that you can keep more profits on the table for investors, for the business itself. And yes, it takes more work and management, but at the end of the day, that just comes down to better systems. And so, I see very successful people creating these ecosystems that point A feeds to point B, feeds to point C. And the analogy of like a table, right? A table has 4 legs or 3 legs. One of those legs is acquiring real estate deals, but the other leg could be property management or construction management or education or, direct sourcing products from China that you're making money on, anything that can support the table and is creating multiple streams of income from the one thing that you're doing, which happens to be, in my case, multifamily real estate. So yeah.
But I love that. I love the fact that you're looking for other ways to create streams of income. I read a long time ago that you should have 7 or 8 different streams of income. And I'm always looking for other avenues that help me create that flow, because we want to have many things that are bringing money to us. I don't think anyone can ever say I have way too much money. Even the Russian billionaire with an amazing yacht, I'm sure he was looking for ways to create more cash flows. Reed, thank you so much for sharing just kind of not only your journey. I think it was inspiring. I loved hearing a little bit about just your story. We could have a lot more conversations about why it took you so long to come to America with Erica, but we'll talk about that with her later. I don't know what the deal is there. But if somebody wanted to look you guys up and figure out what you're doing and how they could get in touch with you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, just jump over to my website. It's reedgoossens.com. That's REEDGOOSSENS. I've got a couple of books up there, got some audiobooks, got obviously my own podcast, and there's a couple of links that you can click to if you want to ever coming through LA. You can hit me up as well for if you want to go out for a beer or coffee whenever COVID lifts and we get back on planes. And you can hit me up at info, that's INFO at reedgoossens.com, and just give me a couple of months warning. And always willing to meet up and talk shop.
Man, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much. This was a great episode. I hope you were inspired for listening to it. And I don't know if you need to travel across the world like Reed did in order to do it, but if that's what it takes, make it happen, because the best way to overcome fear is by taking action. And we loved hearing Reed's story today. So as always, thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
This has been the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show to break free of the Wall Street mindset and begin building wealth on your own terms in places you understand, so that your wealth will never run dry. See you next episode.